Friends, colleagues, Volga Investment Summit is back on air, and we are starting our closing session dedicated to public-private partnership that we started on our plenary session, and with which we're going on right now in a very interesting mixed format.
Исходя из ситуации текущей, которая в стране происходит, предложили, наверное, такой наиболее оптимальный, интересный, где большая часть спикеров с нами выходит в онлайне, такие ключевые спикеры, на которые я буду опираться в ходе дискуссии.
Our key speakers are here in the hall and online. My name is Maxim Tkachenko. I'm the CEO of the National Center of Development of Public-Private Partnership. We are continuing both one of the online sessions and the plenary session, and of one online meeting that we had some 6 months ago, when the COVID situation was in this active phase. And we were discussing then what we are to expect. There was a multitude of different opinions, and I think that we can safely say now that for our sphere there is no crisis at the moment, but there are some considerable changes in the policy, in the regional policy, in the investor expectations, and that we are seeing the repercussions of it in actual projects. We can see changes in the market, and what is changing on it will be the topic of our today's talk. And as I say, I have here some very important speakers, and I will rely on their support. I have Vasily Anisimov, DSK Avtoban, one of the largest concessionaires in Russia, and Oleg Mayorov, Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Investments of the Samara region, representing the Ministry of Economy of one of the leading regions in terms of the public-private partnership. So I will try to use the best of all inputs to our discussion. We also have very distinguished experts: Taras Davydenko, Russian Railways Invest, Denis Kachkin, Anna Lukina, the CEO of Center for PPP in the Volga region, Vasily Spiridonov, connecting to us, representative of SPEN, Anton Chertov, head of the lawmaking initiatives from Quadra. So we have a very interesting composition of our panel. Unfortunately, we will need to respect our timing and keep our session to 1 hour 15 minutes. I will ask some blitz questions to two of our participants who are here in the hall. And I will ask them to share their opinion about the previous peak of the COVID that we used to have in the winter. And we are nearing the next one, I'm afraid. So my question will be, what is the impact of the current situation on the public-private partnership market?
С одной стороны, неправильно говорить о том, что ковидная ситуация никак не повлияла на ситуацию.
I wouldn't say that the COVID situation has not affected the situation on the market. The projects that are already launched, the large infrastructural projects, well, they are underway and they are in the progress. There are no serious hindrances in their implementation or any serious delays. The sphere of road construction is an industry and a sector of an uninterrupted cycle. We do not stop, not for an instant. And we we're saying that we do not use the COVID situation as a clause to exempt us from any liability. Vice versa, the other way around. We're trying to fulfill some of our obligations ahead of time, even though we have to, let's say, complete this project 1 year later. Speaking about prospects, I have some doubts as to us not losing our pace, not losing our tempo, because the issues related to front-end engineering design, to coordinated work of all the stakeholders in the concessions and so on. Well, you understand that the teams of both the concessionaire and the concedent, their consultants and their counselors, despite all of our best efforts in the video conferencing and online conferences, well, they will not replace actual live communication. So there is a risk that the deficit of this actual live communication will result in decreasing of the tempo of our transactions, because they are all based on trust. Yes, we will pick up on this topic, especially when we are speaking about the trust, because this situation well, really needs analysis. Good evening, dear colleagues. I'm glad to welcome you to Samara, both people online and offline. What was the impact of the crisis that we are seeing underway on the market of regional public-private partnership projects? Allow me to give you a perspective of the Samara region. Of course, the launch of new projects has been complicated by this situation. We tried to launch several competitions, specifically including our projects related with our assets in the south, I mean the children's resort camps in the Black Sea. The investors have been very conservative and very cautious about these projects. This was not about the conditions provided by the region. I think that we need to change the economic side of these projects, and we are working now on trying to offer something more favorable, some more favorable conditions, beneficial conditions for our investors. From the viewpoint of the projects that are underway now, well, this has been discussed today. There is a certain time lag in the infrastructural projects, and I think that the impact of this crisis will show on the operational phase. Now, in the period of construction, we do not see any major issues. However, on the operational phase, yes, that might be a little bit of an issue. Specifically, it will be important for the projects which depend on the payments from the citizens, from the community. Continuing from where I stopped, we really need to see where we can ensure ourselves on these projects to provide a backup. I mean, probably this will entail a more active involvement of the federal budget, including the possibilities provided by national projects. We spoke that it is necessary to provide a more detailed breaking down of the usage of federal funds in the construction phases. Next point is to use the practical tools of preferential credits from the corporations of SMEs, from VEB Corporation, and from different banking products, which could be engaged in order to improve the economics of projects for investors.
То есть в сухом остатке, из того, что я услышал от Дениса, темпы снизятся в любом случае, потому что элемент личного
drawing
общения.
the first conclusion,
Есть инерция,
the growth rates will go down, and because there is a lack of live communication between stakeholders. And second is that we will need to change the economy of the projects at the current moment based on the present-day realia. And in some cases to provide some budget backup financing, because we do not know how deep the pandemic will go, and there are specific risks in specific sectors, for example, in products aimed at children. I'm giving the floor to my colleagues from the regions now. I really want to see the regional cross-section of our discussion. So yesterday we spoke about the commercial results of the years 2020, and we saw that the PPP market is quite the opposite of what we see in the real sector market. The concession in industrial park was at level 7, and the concession in commercial markets was at 0.
В эти отрасли пошел. Я бы хотел попросить
I would like Anna Lukina from Kaluga, a very well-known innovating region in terms of public-private partnership, which has experience of railroad concessions and many other types of concessions. And I remember that their railroad project received a Rosinfra award. Anna, before and after the pandemics, how has the regional PPP economy changed? Good evening, and thank you for having me here. I'm really glad to share our experience. Yes, I would agree with my colleagues on both points. For the projects that are currently underway in the Kaluga region, there were some points which were related with the impact of the pandemic. There were some delays in the approval process of procedures because people had to do their work on a distance basis. Second, we had to extend the time frames for both front-end engineering, construction, and so on. And of course, we had some problems with new projects. I wouldn't say that both the region is ready to finance such projects, especially considering the fact that budget financing is not always possible. The budget is not experiencing the best of times at the moment and not the best of the situations. So both investors have become more cautious. They take more time and more attention to looking into specific circumstances. And on the other hand, the Ministry of Finance of the Kaluga region is also quite specific about project justification, about justification of every single ruble in the project. And I would say that the situation has been quite difficult for the economy. And I'm afraid lest we should have some dump when we will not have interesting projects. Yeah, Anna, the portfolio of consumer-oriented projects is rather large in case of Kaluga, both in social infrastructure, in museum infrastructure, and so on. These projects are directly dependent on customer spending. Have the concessionaires been full of panic there, and have they been? Yes, it's a yes for the majority for the of projects, especially for the projects which do not have any guaranteed minimum profit or income. Yes, there will be projects which would be highly dependent on consumer spending. Tourism projects, for example, they are at a suspension phase currently. And they are asking for the extension not only for the construction and commissioning of facilities, but also for the operation of facilities. what concerns some budget co-financing, the situation also has not been very smooth, because the investors are quite anxious about keeping the original conditions of budget financing. And of course, all investors are writing to us with their appeals, which have to go through the anti-monopoly agency, and well, they are not always willing to meet all the new requirements and requests of investors. Okay, concluding this topic and moving on to the next region, I would like to ask something else. What about new projects planned for the year 2020? Can you share your experience of working with them? Has there been a halt in the market? No, there hasn't been a stall in the market. We now know our requirements, we know what our needs are, and as I said, well, the budgetary support, yes, it will be in place, but it will be quite different in this new reality. So we need new projects, we need new investors who would like to implement those projects. Currently, we have 5 or 6 projects on the table for the next year. They are practically ready, and if we have an approval in the higher circles of authorities, these projects will be launched in the year 2021. This project includes heat supply, water supply, and water sewage. These are 2 major projects that are going to be implemented. We have 1 project in the sphere of healthcare and 2 projects related to, well, it's somewhere in the intersection of transport, culture, and tourism. Thank you, Anna. And we are moving on with the same questions to the Saratov region. Елизавета, what are your impressions on the situation?
So there are not that many projects and PPP projects, but how do you assess, how do you evaluate the current situation? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm happy to hear and see you. I will agree with previous speakers that the pandemic obviously has an impact. Fortunately for us, there are not that many major changes, and in the first half of the year, we witnessed some growth in terms of the realized investments, about 12% growth. But when it comes to the operation, and my Samara colleague confirmed, we do have issues. We have a PPP agreement for Gagarin Airport, and the passenger traffic, obviously, there was a definite reduction. But despite the fact, the cities began to develop new areas, and we're now in the middle of discussing construction of an airport in one of the industrial cities of the region, in Balakovo. So despite cancellation of flights, certain flights, air traffic is still a typical area, a promising area. When it comes to water supply, in terms of water supply projects, they have certain reduction in investments. In terms of concessions, there are issues with changes in benefits, in revision of rates, tariffs, etc. These are the issues we have. When it comes to new objects, new facilities, we're in a stage of negotiations. This year, we have requests, and we're now in the active negotiation stage. So what does that do to? Maybe we have become more active. It's hard to tell. It's hard to give you a definitive answer. So far, yeah, we still have the same question to ourselves. We had an interesting opinion of one of our colleagues referring to industrial parks that at the time of the crisis, these industrial parks enjoy more demand. So maybe that the PPP mechanism should enjoy more demand, or it should. But according to what Anna said, Investor requested budget leverage. So what is the situation? What is the standpoint? What is the stance of the Ministry of Finance, of the regional authorities? In which industries are they prepared to extend regional funding? Maybe water supply, etc. When it comes to tariffs or social infrastructure. The first deputy chairman of the government, who's in charge of this sector, he is the Minister of Finance. And so, on the one hand, the approvals, let's say, easier to do. But oftentimes, this refers to infrastructure construction, and that's it. When it comes to the increase of let's say, timelines for benefits, for incentives, we plan on solving these issues. So you tend to persuade colleagues that they should be in close cooperation with you, right? Thank you. Then summing up this regional evaluation of what's happening, echoing back to Oleg's presentation, we talked about the region's policy before and after, and the plans going forward. We confirmed that regions should change their policies when it comes to investor relations in two aspects. Project work, project-related work. We should have more projects on the part of the state, the government, and we should be more flexible when it comes to co-financing and other mechanisms that mitigate commercial risk. Can we have the presentation? Just to elaborate on this one. It seems like it's a federal level trend. Interest to federal parks obviously has grown at the time during the pandemic, and we see some explosive growth and activity from the investors. And unlike PPP projects, there are more of infrastructure projects, and here we deal with industry-related projects. These are specific projects with specific objectives, and companies tend to localize their production closer to their own sites, their own facilities, so they reduce their logistics costs. And I'll try to stay to be short. We've already talked about ratings. We've been quite creative to copy-pasting experience of other regions, including the colleagues that are with us today, Kaluga region, that we learned from when it comes to railroad concessions. And thanks to that, we are now more successful when it comes to, as compared with other projects. We launched a project within a shorter time frame. With Dimidenko, we collaborated with him when he was back when he was in Siberia. He was in charge of this area and other regions as well. We have here colleagues from Sartov region who will be with us next week, and we will have an offline meeting. We'll be discussing PPP. So as of today, we have this pyramid in place. Many regions talk about cooperation and interaction with the Ministry of Finance. I'm convinced that the success of any investment project, PPP project, depends on building a clear scheme or way for interactions within the executive authorities. So a partner is not isolated, so as to make sure that it's a systemic teamwork And we've made an effort, and we have put together this pyramid. At the top, you see the Ministry of Economic Development. We have interregional groups with their respective representatives for their respective services, including the Ministry of Finance, which is important. People from these interdepartmental services, they look into these projects from the outside all the way to the implementation, and they know they're always in the loop, so to speak. So it's easier for them to make specific decisions whenever when a decision goes through the entire cycle, from review to implementation. So what do we have today? In Samara region, we have 74 projects in progress. The value is 157 billion rubles. And we plan on creating 4,400 jobs, and we have 21 objects that provide services. Mostly these are healthcare objects that we had previously launched. I should say that healthcare has no issues with the sector, has no issues with payback. Return on investment with demand, and we've monitored each and every project. And when it comes to healthcare, there are no requests to change, requests in terms of changes of terms and conditions. 8 billion rubles, that number has changed. We've paid 5 billion for the bridge construction, so that number will now be 13 billion, and over 1,300 jobs. So that project management principle in PPP is in place. So each and every project is reviewed, and people are personally accountable to the chairman of the government for the implementation of such projects. When it comes to the COVID-19 situation, has it accelerated this process, or has it slowed it down or complicated? No. In fact, we're actively transitioning to VKS from within the government, in the government, and in many cases it's become a little more fast-paced. Sooner or later. So the video conference as method of communications is now the standard de facto. So we have a dedicated information resource with 246 projects that we had looked into before. Those that are in progress. These are the internal resources, and we've been thinking about integrating it with Rosinfra. And Maxim, we've already talked about this. It would be nice to see that our office in Samara region could be integrated with our information resource into the resource. So our IT guys have to work a bit more on this integration. Like I said, we have 21 projects that are already commissioned, that are working, and they are providing services. These are rather large medical centers or healthcare centers. So they allotted them, they provided them with land plots. And now we are, since last year, we started last year, we began to implement these large infrastructure projects that in the midterm will significantly change logistics in Samara region, as well as in the nearby regions of the Volga Federal District, Privolzhsky Federal District. They will help grow gross regional product, and they will help change to the better, obviously, the Samara-Tolyatti agglomeration. This is the largest project in Russia, by the way. To date, after he means second to marking. Marking is the project that is being implemented in many regions. But speaking of a classic concession project, it's the biggest one to date in the Russian Federation. So this is the bridge across Volga, bypassing Tolyatti. About 4 kilometers of this bridge has to be built, and 90 kilometers is the bypass road, Tolyatti, the road that bypasses Tolyatti. So Denis will agree, technically, it'll be more complex, more difficult than building the Crimean bridge, because in certain areas, Volga is deeper. So this project is underway. So we have put forth the cost estimate documentation, and now we're building the most difficult section, which is the bridge passage. It's 120 billion is the cost. So the term of the concession agreement is 20 years. Payback guarantee will be the toll fees, and plus, in addition to that, the government extended its guarantees. It's guaranteed to compensate the costs which are not, let's say, reimbursed by the toll. So it's being implemented. The project implemented as part of the international transport corridor from China. A second project is that also has to do with transport. It's important. This is a railway that leads to Tolyatti's special economic zone. The project was implemented via the mechanism, using the mechanism.
Отдельный разговор. Ну, хорошо, я просто скажу, что да, мы приступили к практической реализации этого проекта. Что у нас сейчас есть в запасе?
So what do we have? We have these children's camps, summer camps, which are located at the shores of the Black Sea, Chernomorsk. We have an interesting project in the area of education that would like to launch. This is the Samara campus, educational center in Samara. We also have a project that has to do with production facility, manufacturing facility, and we are working on high-speed railroad projects, Samara-Tolyatti high-speed railroad, and now we're working on a legal aspect of that project. But that railroad, the decision's been made that we will have this project in the program. Referring to these programs, I remember discussing them at the beginning of the year. We did not have the pandemic then, but in addition to these camps, summer camps, do we have any other projects that we had to actually stop and think? Well, taking into account the best practices of the regions, and we've been actively reviewing these, thanks to your platform, it helps us save a lot of time. We've been reviewing projects referring to these educational ones, taking into account Nizhny Novgorod's experience, best practices, Technical Museum, Загородный парк project. So we have been reviewing all these projects, but it does not have to do with the pandemic. It has to do with the fact that the market is not stagnant. The market is constantly evolving, and we have new tools, new opportunities to implement these projects. Thank you, Oleg. Let's move on to business. Let's move on to... I know that you need some time to get to the airport, so you'll have this concluding presentation. So I'd like to hear from the three of our participants. And I'd like to give the floor to Anton, if he's still with us. Are you still with us, or are you at the airport? Do you have a chance to comment on it, or would you like us to give you a chance to speak later on? We cannot hear you. Yes, we can hear you now. Good afternoon. Apologies for the mask. You can see half my face, but you know, these are safety precautions, and so they're mandatory. Referring to today's topic, thank you very much for the chance to speak today. And in my view, I'm not quite sure. So none of the projects that we've been working on have been stopped or suspended. So they're all in progress. Moreover, public authorities, when it comes to projects that provide for funding, regional financing, regional funds, they tend to shorten the timeline or timing for the project preparation, the project drafting. When it comes to reduction of the investment size or the reduction in the scope of projects, that have been developed. We don't see that reduction. So referring to what it means is that the system and development of projects that has been in place for a long time, that no party believes that these projects should be stopped or suspended. But this probably has to do with the fact that we work on projects that are so that these projects provide for comfortable and sustainable living conditions for the community, for people. So obviously, this is a socially significant topic for the governor to ensure quality utility services, to create comfortable living environment. So obviously, these things cannot be stopped or suspended or canceled. So. Also, I would like to mention that when it comes to when it comes to loans, there's no reduction, there's no slowdown, or there's no reduction of interest on the part of credit institutions when it comes to financing these projects. On the contrary, we see that there's increased interest, in fact. So I would also like to say that there's obviously a problem in reduced payment collection and reduced sales or reduction in the sales numbers, in the sales volume. But it's no strange phenomenon, because do you mean heat or heat and water when it comes to water supply and heat supply as well? Obviously, it's difficult to reduce the heat supply, volumes of heat supply, especially during the heating season. Obviously, we're facing the heating season now. But still, so why did the large cities, why did they suffer? A lot of the utility resources a lot of them have been consumed by entrepreneurs that have been struck by the pandemic, i.e. offices, shopping malls, and a number of other facilities, and mostly SMEs that are non-production, non-manufacturing SMEs. So looking at this region,
не такая распространенность субъектов, которые ведут предпринимательскую деятельность в этих сферах, поэтому, в принципе, вот как раз, когда мы сравнивали
when we compared the trends,
падение собираемости,
the reduction in payment collection from among large cities, 1 million plus cities, this is where colleagues mentioned that the trends in the reduction of payment collections, so their rates were higher. We can also talk about a halt in the development of infrastructure, but so if we look at the support measures or the measures of support that are rendered to the business that has suffered the most, we see that, well, my personal opinion is that support measures have been provided to the construction industry in the most systemic manner. So construction of new housing, increased scope of new construction commissioned is obviously stimulates the development of infrastructure. And so what are you saying? Are you saying that the focus will be on brownfield, not reconstruction, but rather greenfield, right? The greenfield infrastructural shift. Yes, it stimulates the improvement of quality of good products and services, not just the reconstruction of network utilities, but also stimulates improvement of quality of water, the quality of water treatments, sewage water treatment. In one of the regions, it may seem strange, but lately the local community managed to communicate the need to the governor to rebuild sewage water treatment system, and now they are actually, the regional authorities are now taking measures to solve this issue, this problem. When it comes to, so if we look at the support measures that are offered to utility companies, unfortunately, most utility companies, from a standpoint from the federal level, they've received no support, measures of support, except for solid waste processors. So those colleagues have been fortunate to, back in April, there was a resolution by the government that provided for subsidies of up to 20% of revenues back in April of this year. So unfortunately, when it comes to water supply and heat, there were no such resolutions made at the governmental level. On the other hand, I know of at least 10 subjects, Russian Federation subjects, where they had developed regional measures of support to utilities, regardless of whether they are concession operators or other operators or owners or unitary enterprises, etc. So these measures enable us to smoothly go through the heating season of 2019-2020, and then thereon they continue their operations in a steady, in an uninterrupted manner. The regulation continues to be rather unpredictable due to rather strict administrative measures in terms of supporting people, SMEs, individuals, SMEs. As you know, effective from April and January 2021, we have in place a so-called prohibition to impose late fees, referring to utility consumers. On the one hand, it did not have an impact on payments collection, and it did not have an impact in Q2 2020. We're not sure what the numbers will be in Q3, given the fact that they're now talking about extension of this prohibition to levy late fees to subjects of entrepreneurial activity in the most in the industries and industries that have suffered the most. So, you can, in fact, impose late fees, or indebtedness, but you cannot force consumers to actually enforce these enforce late fees. So that's the, in fact. So this is, in fact, one of the stimulating tools that has been eliminated.
We need to respect our timing. So if I understand correctly, you are rather positive about what's going on, but there is a problem of collecting the accounts payable. Do I understand it correctly? Yeah, more or less correctly. And at the moment, we cannot forecast the regulatory risk. Some of the colleagues who deal with oil products with heating supply, they will prove me saying that in July there was a federal law passed which will become effective on the 1st of January. There will be financial guarantees on possible spillages of oil, and everybody knows what this has been erection to. But making these financial guarantees available, well, it can really complicate the economics of any company. Well, to my mind, this is a situation which complicates these decisions. Anton, we will try and get back to you a little later on. You told us something about debt financing and leverage financing. We have Vasily Spiridonov, representative of Sber for the Volga region. Okay, I would like to listen to your perspective. Has there been more requests from business for PPP financing? What is your assessment? What is your evaluation of what we're about to expect in the nearest year? Will the trend break? And maybe you will tell us that some measures which could be effective that are not present now. Good evening, and thank you for having me here. Well, indeed, the impact of the crisis is felt by us in a variety of areas. Well, in our existing portfolio, we don't have any accounts in arrears or other negative factors that could have impacted development of loans in a negative degree. But for the new products, yes, we see some decrease in the number of interested persons and the number of applications. The investors currently are focusing on low-risk projects, the projects with ready models of financing and implementation. Yet, we are sensing the impact of the second wave already. There were some projects which were completely ready and they were prepared for a private initiative. But due to the second surge of the COVID, we had to postpone their start at a later date. For example, people get sick with this infectious disease and they cannot file their application on time. But the situation enabled us to test the institution of special circumstances, something that was already spoken by the colleagues from the regions. And the projects in the phase of implementations and the projects where the construction has been completed, they used this tool, and I am deeply convinced that it has proved very effective. It has proved that it was efficient and instrumental in keeping the projects and keeping the projects up to their timeline and to their tasks. So can you say there were some precedents when people appealed to special circumstances? And they were discussed in public channels in positive cases? Yes. The term of construction of facilities was extended, and it enabled finding a consensus in implementing specific tasks. If financial problems were there, in the housing services, it was possible to feel them. So in the aftermath of the crisis, it was possible to find a mutually acceptable solution. Thank you, Vasily, for sharing your perspective from the bank's point of view. Maybe for a bank it was even more interesting than for other stakeholders in the field. Okay, I'm going to complete the block of the business with the input from Denis. So new projects will be at a lower tempo. generally in the implemented projects, we see that the special circumstances regime has helped them, and we see no dire crisis situations at the moment. As far as measures of regional support, we see that the federal input comes to the construction industry. So, Denis, you are representing a construction industry, and not only roads, you are also building social infrastructure. So, have you felt measures of state support, or was it only referring to the housing construction? And what about your experience of working with social infrastructure? I hear that Avtoban has been working with schools in Khanty-Mansi district and some others. So what's the company's position? Well, first question, in the field of large-scale road construction, there have been no measures helping us to fight the pandemic on the federal level. However, our costs are growing, first and foremost, due to the fact that our large projects are situated in specific locations, and we saw spots of coronavirus in various spots. But we managed to mitigate it with our own effort. Speaking about social objects, yes, we are very interested in working in this area. We had a very good start in the Khanty-Mansi district. We had several requests from the districts in Western Siberia for the implementation of projects. And of course, we will try to implement school construction projects even with greater force and with greater engagement. We had a school in Nizhny Vartovsk, and we have 3 more schools coming up for completion. We are participating in 3 more mixed contracts for construction of schools. So we are quite optimistic about this situation, and we are ready to continue working on this area. To make a preliminary conclusion about this, I think that on the whole, this crisis gave the investors the opportunity of investing in the regions. Because, you see, on the federal level, as far as the road sector is concerned, for the nearest years, the structure of project financing has changed. And this actually was the right thing. Infrastructural construction is a motive for the development of economics on the whole, and the state cannot risk whether the project will be packaged for a year or more. The project with Western China is now implemented in a different scheme, which is not a good thing for us, because banks and IT partners are our co-players and stakeholders. But, well, we have regions, and we would like to thank the Samara region here, with which we are implementing one very important project. The status we have in the Samara region and the status of Samara region as a leader in the country enables us to implement this project in the spirit of partnership. We enjoy understanding, and we try not to abuse this understanding. The mechanism that Mr. Mayorov referred to, related to reassessment of the commercial component of these concession contracts. Yes, this is a giant advantage that we see. And if other concedents will approach these problematics in the same way, I believe it will be a very strong advantage of them. So we see some slowing down, as I said before. On the other hand, in the situation we are having right now, investing in the projects where regions take a special role is a big plus for the investors, because we are working with lower risk projects, where risk is indeed much lower than in many venture projects. And I think that if the investors feel it, everything will be much, much better.
Спасибо, Денис. Да, когда будет необходимо, тогда вас отпустим на самолет.
Yes, Dennis, tell us when you need to go, and we will let you. Okay, we've referred to the term of flexibility more than once today. There are quite a lot of tools of ensuring this flexibility, different allowances for special circumstances. So if we agree about these special circumstances at the outset, things will be much more predictable for us, even when the constraints are strong. Yes, of course, there is a special norm of law which enables us to amend the terms of contracts in special conditions. So we said today again that in some cases the current conditions will be sufficient to apply to the Federal Anti-Monopoly Agency, and we would like to hear Mr. Kachkin's input and his experience of cases in the first or maybe the second wave of the coronavirus. What would be the allowed conditions for changing the terms of contracts, such as extension of the time frames or approval of new parameters of technical and economical projects, because the sales have decreased or the collection of funds has decreased. How is it possible in the current legal field? Maxim, thank you, and I would like to welcome all of the colleagues, and I would like to greet the Samara region. Well, Maxim, what do you have there? Is it the second wave, or are we still in the first wave? Yeah. What I mean to say is that we see the situation escalating. Some projects call for changes, and in order to draw some justification for my further story and for our further dialogue, I would like to remind you what people refer to as which are stipulated for in normal contracts. We have to adhere to the circumstances of insuperable force as set out in Article 401 of the Civil Code. When the circumstance is unexpected, insuperable, or there is a cause and effect relation proving that the onset of repercussions is unfavorable for the concessionaire. And so for us, we are dividing the projects into two large groups. First is the projects which have been affected directly in the most direct way possible, and where there is no doubt that the project has suffered. And speaking about public-private partnership, this includes sports projects, fitness projects, airport projects, and sometimes cinemas. For them, we have normative acts which prohibited the operation of these facilities, as you all are aware of. And here, in general, since these definitely were the circumstances of insuperable force, the companies had to prove their losses and the absence of the respective measures of support. But anyhow, this justification had to be done. My observation there is as follows. If the contract had stipulated the aspects of communications in case of circumstances of insuperable force, then the court will come to the assistance, or the parties will have to negotiate. Yes, this does not simplify the work of the parties to the contract, but we see that this is truly a very good option for the counterparties. The concession agreement, when drafted, needs to include, among the special circumstances, please include circumstances of insuperable forces as one of special conditions. This is a life hack, if you wish to call it that. Then all the questions related to the threshold values, to special communications, they will all have been regulated beforehand. Well, there are borderline cases when the business complained about them, that, let's say, there was no direct ban on operations on the federal level, but there were some other conditions which rendered the business unprofitable. For example, let's say 25% of fill rate in the movie theaters, which rendered the showing of films absolutely unprofitable. Can we use this as circumstances of insuperable force? This actually lies in the second part of what I wanted to tell you. This is about the unclear cases, when there are no normatives and there is no direct black and white treatment of the situation. The classic example is when the project is being in the construction phase, and for some reasons the construction has been suspended. Maybe it was related to the COVID, maybe not. But here one really needs to look into the availability of these limitations and how they affected this project specifically, and what the situation was. We see some appeals in the practice which concern the changing of the market infrastructure resulting from the COVID. The market at which the project had been oriented, the market share has dropped significantly. And in this situation, we will have to work very seriously in reformatting the project and justifying this reformatting, and either asking for governmental support, for public support, and sometimes it will be possible to do by a special decree of the government, or to stall the project. Okay, I referred to the changing in the market. Okay, I lost my thought, but that's okay. So if we speak about regional or municipal projects, they have this difficulty of providing proof that the circumstances indeed belong to circumstances of insuperable force and really require this support. What we see among competitors is this positive thinking that as soon as they apply it to the Chamber of Commerce, they will have a certificate that this was a circumstance of insuperable force, and they will have the support from the government. The reality is that either they will not get the certificate, or the anti-monopoly agency will not accept it easily. Yes, we saw some inputs from the anti-monopoly agency, which said that, okay, we understand what the case is, but we don't see any factors which may serve as reasons for extending the term of the contract. So the situation is rather strange. Anton Chertov had an idea, who is no longer online, that this list of situations, i.e. the change of the market environment, will be in the range of over 20%, will be regarded as the circumstance of insuperable force. If this range is extended or made more flexible, then it will be easier to convince the anti-monopoly agency in an easier way. And sometimes the FIS itself will be interested in making a step towards us. Decree 368 is a serious obstacle in the market, you know. The regional and municipal concessions are not in the most favorable of positions due to the fact that the anti-monopoly organs were oriented at Federal Law 44, where under there is just more legal practice. And in order not to let the state contracts collapse, the state regulator made this decision for the anti-monopoly agency not to treat the pandemic as the force majeure. This is the reason why we need to prove it, justify it, and this is why not always it becomes so easy and so efficient. This is why not always you are able to effect your operations, and this is why you are not always exempted from liability. This is why, in the long run, you have to appeal to court and to appeal the resolution of the FIS. The final case is that the force majeure circumstance, say the pandemic, it is not the grounds for termination of liabilities. It exempts the performer from undue performance. Thank you, Denis. If we have more questions, and in conclusion, I would like our colleagues to address one more project. Yeah, one remark from my side.
We've had quite a bit of experience when it comes to the amendments, changes and amendments from the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service. I'm not sure if my colleagues know or not, whether they know or not, but there is that position, the stance by the Central Office of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, that the opinion is that the services, the mechanisms in those changes is a material condition change. So this is what Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has been guided by, whether it's a change in technical parameters or anything except for some collector rights. You have to prove that to Anti-Monopoly Committee. This is a separate case where people have to make an effort to prove. Obviously, we've managed to do that, but the extension of that list, the grounds of this topic, especially given the pandemic, where you have to make adjustments, amendments to projects. Maybe at your site we have to word it, to formulate it. We've been talking about it, but in fact we have been able to word it, but nobody wants to read them. It's a separate story. It does not really depend on the venue, on the site, but it's a question of the ability and willingness to listen and to hear. The pre-COVID-19 era, we're not yet in the post-COVID era. We're not done with the first wave of that pandemic. In fact, it's been intensified. So the environmental issue, the railroad issue, they've together with the railway, they've put forth a very good project. So I'd like to give the floor to Denis Tarasov. Maybe you will explore some of the circumstances, some of your terms and conditions, and then I'll have Oleg comment on that case. Well, the only amendment was that Taras, the Russian railway, were part of another project, not our project, but we've been actively cooperating with them. So, Taras, maybe you can adjust that response. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. So we've been part of structuring the concession agreement for Titanium Valley in Sverdlovsk region. It's a recent project. We drew upon the experience of our dear distinguished colleagues, and we used the developments that had taken place in Kaluga and in the Samara concession agreement. So we added our own vision. So we ended up with a pretty good option, taking into account the circumstances. So the COVID circumstances can obviously have an impact on timeline, on the rate of return of the concession agreement stakeholders. So the changes that were stipulated when we discussed it with our colleagues from the Ministry of the Economy and Development, Economic Development of Sverdlovsk region, they said, well, if need be, we can harmonize these changes with anti-monopoly service. To me, it makes sense to limit your relations with that agency. So if concession agreement stakeholders can fulfill these obligations, then they should make sure that they don't wait until they have to prove that. In a lot of that depends on a stance of the region, region, when it comes to partaking in those activities due to COVID-19, and decisions that are made or will be made as part of these projects that will be implemented by regions will definitely have an impact. Whether the stakeholders will be able to refer to these circumstances as force majeure. First and foremost, we should strike a balance between the parties. So any attempt to, let's say, draw a balance to either party can render that concession agreement not interesting or uninteresting. So for the first, we're talking about the legal framework and the scope of, or the size of revenues that the concession agreement stakeholder can get. So as part of our concession, when we studied the issue, what decision did we arrive at? So first, the concession agreements, the first three, Kaluga, Tolyatti, and Samara, those three, and Ekaterinburg, of course. So it's difficult to get to generate any profit in such from such agreements, because there was a specialized model that mostly used revenues of railways that were generated based on common use roads. But generally, such concessions had to do with that did not have to do with common use roads. They could be actually market-based agreements, considering the scope of cargo traffic from, for example, a special economic zone or any other site with a certain scope of cargo transportation, cargo traffic, that you could apply a certain rate, a certain tariff. Of course, you need to talk to the consignor, first and foremost, to make sure that the cargoes generated there can have additional expenses, let's say the tariffs for that particular area. But it's a good opportunity to reduce the infrastructure expenses to take it away from that particular enterprise or an area, let's say a special economic zone. You can take it from the region, and you should try to make some kind of a marketable commercial project. Due to the COVID-19, there will be a significant change in the number and nature of concession agreements drafted and PPP projects. Of course, they will now tend to involve concession stakeholders, assigners, in case the particular stakeholder returns the money to investor, and they will now tend to go to projects with a high percentage of commercial interest or a monopoly, let's say, on the part of the Russian railways, and that they will be using their own funds, and they will be investing the funds in projects. So we believe such projects will be in demand, and they will enjoy some demand so industrial zones and clusters with high industrial potential will be able to use that scheme of cooperation with the Russian railways and the possibility to draft comparable projects for the market. So, just to make sure I understand right, so this evolution from Kaluga to Titanium Valley, you've been analyzing the text of the agreement, so the level of importance and the guarantees of the cargo traffic, has it been growing with each and every iteration or not? Because how critical is it for these projects? In fact, cargo traffic guarantee is probably the most important condition for that concession agreement to actually come to fruition with the participation of Russian railways. It's not just that, but it's also if you dispatch cargoes over a short distance, let's say that same scope of cargo is transported over a shorter route, it's less interesting. We're talking about long distance transportation and large volumes of cargoes transported. So this is the baseline for the model. It's an opportunity, obviously, So what you're saying is, under the pandemic, or during the pandemic, despite the fact that industrial companies did not stop, so they actually continued. They do continue to produce. So our colleagues also mentioned that industrial companies have not suffered. So despite that, what you're saying is Russian railways and other investors will be asking for 100% guarantee of cargo traffic. Is that correct? Yes, because if it does not take place, then the probability of lower amount of cargo will render attractiveness of that agreement to zero, will render that agreement to unprofitable. So the region should take responsibility and say that there will be more residents and they control it. If a region is not prepared, then there will not be a concession agreement. So let's sum up this discussion with your short comment to what Taras just said. I believe it's not a conventional example of this type of project, of these types of projects that, where on one hand COVID-19 does not have an impact because these are industrial stakeholders, industrial companies, and the overall, let's say, mood is that we'll look for investments. If there's a certain expectation for a number of investments, then they will guarantee it. In the past, it was normal. Under current circumstances, it's a mandatory condition. So how does the region look at it? If they're ready to take on this load, it's clear that concession stakeholders do not take the risk. So a resident can be here today, but they can leave tomorrow, and not necessarily does it depend on regional authorities or federal authorities. Sometimes it depends on the situation, not people. So what do you think about that? Maybe you can tell us a few words about your project. What about your project status? Well, we are now at the construction stage. Design documentation has been approved. We have contractors defined, and now we're in the middle of construction of this particular facility. So we plan on finalizing it by the end of next year. We have obligations to the residents. We did not just enter the project, but we did so having in mind particular residents. These are new residents, by the way. The region has certain levers of influence. Obviously, no one will join the project without guarantees on the part of the major partner. So we extended guarantees that it will be a break. So the project will not be at a loss. That we will actually make profit, and the expenses relating with operation, and that we will have a planned profit that is fixed in certain internal documents of the Russian railways. We also have an agreement with residents in accordance with which they take on the obligation. They assume certain obligations. So do we. We now concurrently realize a project with Magnitogorsk Metalworks. They are building their logistics center, which fits the so-called COVID mood, the COVID logic, because their logic was to reduce transportation leverage and to build this major logistics hub. And then we had a number of residents that will be able to cover the cargo traffic that we had planned initially. So realizing the actual demand for cargo transportation, you did so. Yes, we did it consciously. So in this case, you have to have specific concrete arrangements with your investors. Thank you very much. Obviously, we're a bit... well, we seem to be out of time, but the previous session took longer. So we must finish now, and we'd like to thank all the people that are now with us online. I would like to thank Vasily Spiridonov, and Denis Kachkin, and Taras Demidenko, Russian Railways Invest. And those of us online, I'd like to thank you. And even Anton is back with us. Thank you very much, Anton, for being with us all the way to the end. I thought this discussion was quite lively and interesting. My conclusion is that so far so good. It seems like we can still control it. We're still able to make sure things don't get any worse. And it depends on the stance of the regions and the investors in terms of their preparedness for the dialogue. The regions would have to reconsider their approach to... Investors will have to make sure they request direct financing, but rather guarantees. And for the current projects, I guess the right approach is to renegotiate the term. And if you can renegotiate, the term, you're advised to do so without actually pushing each other from the financial standpoint. So thank you, dear colleagues, for being with us during the session. I believe it was fruitful and interesting to our online colleagues, as much as it was for me, at least. Thank you very much.